While we might not be as hot on the nickname as some others, we have JSP, Jonathan Pearce, coming up against a short notice replacement this weekend in C-Rod, Christian Rodriguez, a guy who grew up in the gym of Rufus Sport, and it was a lot of fun going back, really watching the tape on Rodriguez. I mean, he had an extensive amateur career, makes his pro debut against another pro debut over with Bellator. That was on the Chandler Pitbull card with Bellator, so crazy to see for Christian Rodriguez. Opportunities with Bellator, CFFC, LFA, like he's really kind of been around the block and fought some decent levels of competition in his short MMA career. I mean, he's 7-0 already. He's only 24 years old, so he really does have a high ceiling, and I'm going to talk a lot about the technique of Christian Rodriguez, especially in a fight like this, but we talk about some of the prospects on this card not being as deep, not necessarily with the name value recognition, and I'll talk about JSP as well, but Matt, for Christian Rodriguez, I got really excited when I went back and watched some of his fight tape.
So I have this whole rule that I have where when I hear superstars in the NBA talk about sort of up-and-coming guys glowingly, that's when I get excited about those up-and-coming guys. Like, when you hear Kevin Durant talk about how good Scotty Barnes and Evan Mobley are, you can get excited about those young players as a fan because you're like, wow, that guy really knows what he's talking about. Christian Rodriguez has everybody at Rufus Sport vouching for him and very well-respected members at that gym doing it, and that's why I'm so excited for him making his debut.
Yeah, we had one big scare last week where it was unfortunate for City Kickboxing. Carlos Alberg had a fight that happened against Fabio Strong.
Forgettable one.
Israel Adesanya had a very competitive fight with Robert Whittaker, but the hyped-up prospect at the start of the card in Blood Diamond, he was hyped up by everybody. Adesanya really went out of his way to hype him up, and it just didn't happen. But for Rodriguez, much younger in his career, much more well-rounded.
And there's more people, like with Adesanya, that's his main training partner. The Pettis brothers like Rodriguez, Paul Felder does, Gerald Mearshart. Like, he does have a lot of people who are sort of looking out for him in that regard. It's just nice to see for someone getting into the sport because, again, not to go off on some weird tangent, but in MMA, it's very rare that you have someone who's brought up by this one gym, who has a lot of good veterans looking out for them, who has a good foundation for skills, and who actually stays around. Christian Rodriguez does seem to check a lot of those boxes early on.
So if you look at it for Christian Rodriguez, he was on Dana White's Contender Series this past summer, and if you look at the fight that he had, it was an interesting one against Junior Cortez, and listen, in that one, 5-0 versus 5-1, it happened back in October. You had the man himself, Rodriguez, as a slight favorite. I guess he was in around a minus 195, but going into that fight, you had Rodriguez miss weight, which was very unfortunate. He ends up getting the win, and the weirdest part about the entire experience was the UFC decided to sign the Cage Warriors champion and Jake Hadley, who missed weight, but then when it came to Rodriguez, Dana White was like, yeah, well, you were 5-0, and you missed weight, and there's going to be more opportunities. So when you get your opportunity, come out and fight. So what Rodriguez does, he goes back out there, he fights with North American Fighting Championship Super Brawl, gets a verbal submission win over Ryan McIntosh, who was 19-36 at the time. And I went out and I thought, you know what? I really want to see this fight tape in NAFC. So I did my Google search, I looked on Facebook, and then I found one of the guys from Rufus Sports saying, no, they're not streaming this event. So there's no tape on this. Nobody can see it. So I have no idea how that fight went. And honestly, it sounds Bush League for me. There's nobody that goes harder to find tape. I go so hard in the paint, deep in the weeds, whatever you want to say, to find fight tape. I could not find that NAFC. So if you can find it, send me a link down below. But they didn't stream it. There's nothing out there. And that is all I have to say. But through the rest of the fights that I could find against CFFC, LFA, Bellator, out of Rodriguez and the technique, beautiful 1-2, and then off of the 1-2, he can really land whatever strike he wants into his leg kicks. The best thing too, high school wrestling advantage that he has, and listen, is wrestling his biggest strength? Not necessarily, definitely not offensively, but defensively, he's really able to get out of some sticky situations in his fights.
I really do worry about him grappling, though, with a guy like JSP. And listen, I can openly admit, I wasn't the biggest Jonathan Pearce guy. He had one of the worst UFC debuts you can have. He got embarrassed by a sort of veteran who's been aging himself out of the sport. Because, let's be honest, like, Joe Lozon isn't really looked at, especially at that stage of his career, the same way that we speak about a guy like Jim Miller, who fights this weekend. Like, with Jim Miller, he's definitely older in his career, but there's still some tread left on those tires. Whereas with Lozon, he's a little bit further past. He looked great against JSP, and that just made me really concerned about the future for Pearce, but he has completely recollected himself and really improved on that first on that first performance. And it's not just that he's improved in small ways, it's that he got completely out-grappled in his UFC debut. So you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, you really have to question this guy's grappling defense moving forward. He's looked amazing ever since, and it hasn't just been like he goes out there and he out-athleticisms guys. No, he's someone who can chain his takedowns together, will use the clinch to then set up his takedown attempts. It's been a really nice progression out of Jonathan Pearce, because how many guys do we see come into the UFC, Fabio Cherant, and they're just sort of that same guy from their first fight into their second fight into their third fight. Jonathan Pearce at first looked like he could have been going down that road, but he's really shown great improvements ever since.
In that fight against Joe Lauzon too, the trouble was Lauzon was using these long-range weapons, hitting JSP, rocking him, and then all of a sudden that really set everything up for Lauzon. So I honestly wonder that one, it was the moment too much too soon, because
could have been.
You look at the next two fights for Jonathan Pearce. He goes out there and fights another well-rounded guy in Kai Kamaka. When you compare Kamaka to a guy like Rodriguez, Kamaka's much more wrestling intensive, and his combinations, a little bit slower, definitely not as much power, which is kind of funny to say because Rodriguez is a volume guy, but once that volume starts to add up, he can really, really hurt his opponents. But JSP against Kamaka, he's able to go out there, go 5 of 7 at takedown attempts, really grind him out, finish him on the mat, and that really impressed me. Then his next fight out against Omar Morales, the weird thing about Jonathan Pearce, and this is the funny thing about this fight, you're going to see it for Christian Rodriguez on the screen. Last time he weighed in, he takes that fight against Ryan McIntosh back in January. It was at a catch weight of 150 pounds. Rodriguez has fought all over the map in terms of his weigh-ins. He fought Junior Cortez at bantamweight, but he missed weight. Then before that, he has a bantamweight fight with CFFC. Then before that, a catch weight at 140 against John Pham, where he finished him. And it was really nice the way he was able to get it down to the mat. And it almost looked like, is he going to sink it from this angle? Oh yeah, he's got it. So it is weird to see where Rodriguez fits in, because when I look at him fight, I go, oh, this guy's a bantamweight. Frame-wise, height-wise, everything, this guy's a bantamweight. You look at JSP at 145, the guy's massive. And against Omar Morales, it was like, okay, Omar's massive. Omar's bigger in this fight, but Omar was a long-time lightweight, and I don't know why after 35 he decided to make the change to featherweight. But all that to say, at the start of that fight, in the first half of the first round, Omar Morales is having a lot of success. There was a point where Pearce goes for like a lazy takedown. He's kind of off balance on the break. He gets cracked by a right hand of Morales, and you think, oh, maybe this is the beginning of the end. But JSP goes out there, chains together his takedowns. In that fight, he goes 6 of 11. And he finishes Morales on the ground. And Morales' only other loss in the UFC, other than that, was Giga Chikadze. So kind of crazy to see that. But Matt, when I look at this fight, I really do consider it. I mean, we don't have odds because it was originally supposed to be Austin Lingo and Jonathan Pearce. A very interesting fight. Lingo's a big guy for 145. He always plots forward. He really backs you up against the cage, does good work. But when it does come to this fight, I do see Rodriguez having success with his hands in the first round. I just wonder how he's going to make out with the size of Jonathan Pearce coming out of fight ready in this one.
And that's the thing, like, Omar Morales can use some of his physicality to sort of chuck Jonathan Pearce off of him. And even he couldn't really do that at a certain point. That's what I worry about with Rodriguez. Even if he does have success in the first round, he doesn't really have enough pop, I don't think, to hurt Pearce enough to finish him in that first round. And if it does go into the second or the third, I think it does sort of start to shift towards Jonathan Pearce because of his overall grappling game. And that's the thing. If Pearce does get you down to the mat, he is always working. He's trying to get into half guard. He's trying to get into full mount. He's threatening with a lot of different things, which is going to force you to be active off of your back and force you to waste a lot of energy. So I do like Jonathan Pearce in this matchup. And this is the last thing that has to be said. Even if, like, on full training camps, yes, Christian Rodriguez might have a good chance. It's on a week's notice. That's a really hard ask for anyone to do, to come in on 1 week's notice and fight someone like Jonathan Pearce, that's all.
I would have loved to have seen a full camp because Rodriguez does a great job cutting the cage for a young guy. The way that he moves on the feet and his takedown defense up against the cage is very, very good. Pearce is just so much bigger. And you talk about wrestling. I mean, he was a high school state finalist at Science Hill. So that's fun.
But I think it's fair to say Jonathan Pearce is a much more wrestling-heavy MMA fighter.
And Jonathan Pearce, when he wrestled in high school, 125 and 133 pounds. How crazy is that? Must have taken a big growth spurt there near the end. But yeah, I mean, in this fight, it's a tricky one. I love Rodriguez's ceiling. I want to see him compete at 135 moving forward. But we get this opportunity here on short notice, and sometimes it works out. David Onama, Mason Jones, and he's coming up this weekend against Buckley Benitez. But in this fight, both of us right now going with Jonathan Pearce. Can't wait to see these guys face off on Friday. Sets us up well for question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims coming up this Saturday. And listen, I'm looking forward to the fights. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it.